and welcome back to a new video, and in today's video we are going to be talking about my favorite books from 2025. By the way, if you are hearing some thunder, it's because it's about to rain really hard, so there's some thunder going on, but you're going to ignore that. And if you're new here, hi, I'm Carol, and in this channel we talk mainly about books. But going back to the topic of today's video, I have 11 books to talk about with you. I try to stay with 10 books for my top 10 books of 2025, but some of these books are from series, so I gave the excuse that they are kind of sequels to each other, they are kind of part of the same series, so I could add 11 books to my list. And by the way, in terms of the amount of books that I read last year, I read a total of 53 books, which isn't my highest. I was in a reading slump for a good part of the year, but it also wasn't my lowest. But let's start by talking about my favorite books from 2025. In terms of the order of the books, there aren't any particular order of which one is my favorite, which one is my least favorite. They are just kind of in the order of when I read them. So let's start with the first book on this list, and it was one of the first books that I read in 2025. It was, out of all the books in this list, this was the first book that I read in 2025, and it was Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams. This is technically the sequel for Raining Rome, which is the first book in the Raining Rome series, which is a series of interconnected standalone romance novels. And in Practice Makes Perfect, we follow Annie. She owns a flower shop in this very small town of Rome in Kentucky. And then we have Will, who is her sister-in-law's bodyguard. And Annie, she's known for having kind of social anxiety. She's not great at dating. She has a lot of anxiety surrounding dating. And Will is known to be a playboy, and at the start of the book, Will basically agrees to be Annie's dating coach, but it's a romance novel, so you can kind of guess what will happen. The coaching will stop being just about teaching her how to date. And overall, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was just so cute and fluffy, and I just loved reading this book. I had so much fun, and the dynamic between the characters was just amazing. The romance, I really enjoyed reading about it, and overall I just had a lot of fun reading these books. And I recently read this next book in the Raining Rome series, which is Back, Borrow, or Steal, and one of my favorite parts about that book was the appearances of Annie and Will, and especially Annie and Will together. I kind of wish we had more of them in the third book in the series, but I'm happy that we got these characters in their own book, and I'm happy that I read them because it was just so much fun. The next book on the list is Reckless by Elsie Silver. This is the fourth book in the Chestnut Spring series, which is a series of technically interconnected standalone romance novels. I say technically because you can read it as that, but I would highly recommend, if you decide to read the series, to read them in order and read all the books, because in this way you understand a little bit more about the characters, their stories, what is going on. I feel like you lose quite a bit if you don't read the series in order. But basically, in Reckless, we follow Theo and Winter. Winter, she's the sister from the female main character in the first book in the series, which is Flawless. And we learn a lot about Winter in that first book, and about her relationship with her sister and what is going on in Winter's life that will be very important in this book. But essentially, Winter, she doesn't have the best mother. Her parents' relationship is not the greatest, and essentially Winter had an strange relationship with her sister, and she's also going through a divorce, which is basically the result of something she finds out during the first book in Flawless. And in this book, we are following Winter reconnecting with her sister, and also healing her relationship with her sister and her father, and also going through this divorce from her husband. But the romance section is with Theo, who is one of the best friends from the male main character in the first book. He's a bull rider, and at the beginning of the book, right at the first few pages, Winter and Theo, they meet while they are going to have dinner at the ranch, the family home of Brad, who is the male main character in Flawless. And she initially sees him in a... Wow, it's raining hard. I hope you can hear it through the microphone. But going back, Winter and Theo, they initially meet when they are going to this dinner. She initially sees him at a gas station. She immediately thinks he's super hot, and then she realizes that they are driving to the same place, and then when they arrive there they have this big fight. But afterwards they also figure out that they're staying in the same hotel, and they decide that they find each other attractive, so they decide to have a one-night stand. And apparently it's super magical, it's amazing, something out of this world. And also Winter accidentally gets pregnant. I think this is kind of a little bit of a spoiler. But Theo doesn't find out that he had a daughter until like a year later, when he goes back to the small town and he sees Winter with a baby that looks exactly like him. And in my opinion, this book's just accidental pregnancy done right, secret child done right. This book was just so amazing to read. Winter and Theo, they were just so complex and such interesting characters to read about, and to read the relationship and the development of the relationship and then building this family. And it was just such a nice book to read, so I'm adding it to one of my favorite books of 2025. The next book in this list is kind of a different vibe, and it is The Wedding People by Alison Isbeck. This is more of like a general fiction, literary fiction, where we follow Phoebe. She's a college professor who has been going through some rough stuff. Her life hasn't been the best. She recently found out that she can't have babies, she has gone through a divorce, and she's very depressed, and she decides to leave Earth. She decides that she no longer wants to be in the world of the living, and so she books this hotel, which is kind of her dream hotel. She always dreamed about staying at this hotel, and so she books a room there, and she decides to leave Earth there. But the moment that she arrives at the hotel, she finds out that she's the only person there that isn't there for this very fancy wedding. And while she's riding the elevator to her room, she meets the bride and they strike a friendship. And basically the bride convinces Phoebe to stay in the world of the living, and Phoebe ends up joining the wedding people, the people that are there for this wedding. And with that, she ends up making friendships, she ends up meeting a lot of new people, and she figures out what she wants to do with her life. And in general, Phoebe's life is changed forever because of the wedding people. And if you just start aligning, it's raining really hard. And the reason why I loved the wedding people so much is because when the writing style was so amazing. This book deals with very heavy topics that you definitely need to check the trigger warnings before you read this book, but book deals with such heavy topics, but the author managed to talk about it in such a light way. And overall, again, this book was just so light and pleasant to read, even though the topics it deals with are very much not pleasant. And I was just so impressed with the writer, with the writing style and the storytelling, that I just really loved The Wedding People, and it was one of my favorite books from 2025. For the next two books in my list of best books of 2025, they are technically part of the same series, but they're also from interconnected standalone romance series, and the first one is The Wingman by Stephanie Archer. This is the third book. Yes, it is the third book from the Vancouver Storm series, which is a series of interconnected standalone hockey romances. I read the first two books in the series and I absolutely love them, especially the second book. This series just does something to my brain, and it wasn't different with The Wingman. In The Wingman, you follow Hayden and Darcy. They first meet during college, and Hayden has this massive crush on Darcy, but for the past around, I think, 7 years, she has been dating another one of his best friends, and she recently got engaged, but then she decided to call it off. She decided to break up with her longtime boyfriend, and then she ends up going to spend a little bit of time with Hayden in Vancouver. And while she's with him, Darcy realizes that she doesn't want to do a relationship again for a while, because she feels like she lost so much of her 20s stuck in this relationship where she wasn't ever really that happy, and that she wants to date around. She wants to learn how to become a player, but she has no idea how to do that because she has never done that. While Hayden, he is known for being a player, so she asks her best friend to teach her on how to be a player and how to date around, but Hayden has a massive crush on her. And this is a romance novel, you can figure out what happens. And this is one of those books where if I look with a critical lens, there are things about this book that I think could be better, needed more development, but if I look at it from an entertainment standpoint or just how I felt while reading this book. I love it. Again, this series just does something to my brain. My brain really, really, really loves the Vancouver Storm series. My brain just, it's kind of like a happy juice for my brain. My brain is just so happy when I read the series. So The Wingman is one of my best books from 2025, and the next book in my list is the fourth book in the Vancouver Storm series, and it is Close Off. And in this book we follow Alexei and Georgia. We first meet Alexei in the first book, and he's kind of this grumpy older player who is kind of not injury prone, but he had a lot of injuries because he gets in a lot of fights. He's very physical on the ice. And then we have Georgia, who is the team doctor. She's one of the team doctors, and we first see these two interact. We first hear about Georgia in the second book in the series, and we already see that Alexei doesn't like her, and then we meet her in the third book in the series, and Alexei hates her and Georgia hates Alexei, and they just hate each other, and every time they are near each other they are fighting, they are bickering, they are saying things to each other that are kind of despicable. So it's kind of surprising when at the end of The Wingman we find out the two got married, and we are like, what? Why? How? And basically, in the Close Off, we find out why Sue got married. Essentially, Alexei, he's Russian, but he lived in Canada since he was like 6 years old. His whole family is there, his whole life is there, his whole career is in Canada, and he wants to continue living in Canada. And he's reached a point in his life and in his career that he needs to start thinking about the fact that you need to retire soon, because he is no longer in his 20s. He had a lot of injuries, so he's not in the best shape of his life, so he needs to start thinking about the fact that he will need to retire in the next few years. But he's basically in Canada with a work visa. He's staying there because he has a visa that is linked to his job at the team. And ever since he started playing hockey professionally, he has been trying to get a visa so he could stay to get the citizenship, the Canadian citizenship, but he never manages to get it. There's always something that goes wrong, and his visa or his citizenship application seems to always be getting denied. So he really wants the Canadian citizenship, but he's struggling to get it. So his coach one day just says, hey, why don't you marry a Canadian citizen? This way it will be easier for you to get the Canadian citizenship. And Georgia, on the other hand, she's a doctor. She is studying, she has this research where she's trying to find better ways, or she's like researching ways to help athletes on recovering from injury. But her research, the funding for her research gets slashed by the government at the beginning of the book, and she wants to find a way to be able to pay for her research. And a little detail about Georgia and her family is that her father is part of this very wealthy Canadian family, but he's estranged from that family. But her late grandfather left an inheritance for her. He left her in the will, he left her a lot of money. The little detail about this will is that in order for her to access this money, she needs to be married. The only way for her to access money is if she's married. So Georgia and Alexei, they strike this deal where they will essentially get married and pretend to be married in order for Alexei to get his citizenship, and in order for Georgia to get access to this money so she can fund her research. And this is another one of those books that, if I look with a critical lens, I didn't really like it from a critical standpoint, because there are just things about this book that I don't agree with. There are things that Alexei says to Georgia that I think are unexcusable. It's just unacceptable. But when I look at it from an entertainment point of view, I just love this book. It does something to my brain. I love the dynamic between the characters, except for the things that Alexei says to her. But like, they prank each other, they try to annoy each other. It's just, from an entertainment point of view, I really enjoyed it. From a critical point of view, not my favorite, but I decided to put it on my list of best books of 2025 because, again, this series just does something to my brain. My brain really likes it, so it is one of my best books of 2025. And again, I'm sorry if there's a lot of background noise. I'm looking at like if the mic is catching on, and I'm scared it might be catching on, but it is raining like very, very hard. so there might be some sound in the background, some ambience sound in the background. But to continue on with my list of best books of 2025, we have another 2 books that are technically part of the same series, but they are kind of a different vibe. The first book is The Serpent and the Wings of Night. This is the first book in the Crowns of Nyaxa series, and in this book we follow Oriana. She's the human daughter of the vampire king of this vampire land, and Oriana is one of the few humans living in this vampire land, which, as you can guess, isn't the safest, and essentially one of the few reasons why Oriana is still alive and kind of safe is because she's the daughter of the vampire king. But every few years there is this tournament to the death in this land where the winner gets a wish granted from the goddess of death, Nyaxa, and Oriana has this one wish she wants to be granted, but Nyaxa is one of the few people, the goddess is one of the few entities that will be able to grant her this wish in a way that can be safe. So she enters this tournament to the death where she's the only human surrounded by a lot of vampires, so it's a great idea. And Oriana joins this tournament. She is sure she really wants to win. What she isn't expecting is to meet new friends and meet a love interest in the story. And I'm just going to say this book is amazing. This book was different from what I usually read. It's quite dark, but I had a lot of fun reading it. I'm very curious about what will happen next, especially because the plot twist at the end and what happened in the end, and the fact that it's a romance and there is a romance between Oriana and Rain and they are supposed to end up together. I'm curious about how they will fix that. How will they fix the plot twist at the end of this book? Because if you read this book, you know what happens. And I'm just curious, how will they fix it? But essentially, I had a lot of fun reading it. I tried to get into romantasy last year, and this book, I think, it's what kind of convinced me that yes, I can like romantasy, because it's a book that, in my opinion, did the romance right and did the fantasy side right, and it was again just so entertaining. Very dark, but entertaining. The next book on my list is a novella that comes between The Serpent and the Wings of Night, and the second book in this series, and it is Six Scorched Roses. In this novella, we follow Lord Vale and Lilith. Lilith, she's a scientist, she's a human, and she's a scientist that lives in this village that has been... A lot of people have been dying because of this plague that has been affecting this village for many years, and now Lilith's sister was contaminated with this plague, and Lilith is desperate to find a cure for the plague. And Lord Vale, he's the local vampire. This story takes place in the human world, the human country, so the fact that there's a vampire, that's not their usual place to be. But Lord Vale is a centuries-old vampire that is living there, and Lilith decides to go on his door, knock on his door, and strike a deal with him where she will give him a magical rose in return for a vial of his blood, because she wants to study his blood, because she thinks maybe vampire blood might help her find the cure for this plague. There are, of course, the little details that one Lord Vale is a vampire that might kill her, and then the second one is the fact that in this universe, each era is there is a patron god to each region, and Nyaxa, she isn't really well liked. She's actually very much hated by the other gods in this universe, so especially the human gods. So the gods might be mad at Lilith if they find out that she's experimenting with vampire blood. But overall, this book was also kind of dark. It was dark, but it was way more romantic than The Serpent and the Wings of Night, and I just absolutely love this book. The yearning was amazing. If you are looking for a book with a lot of yearning, a romance with a lot of yearning, try this one, because it's not long, and again, the yearning. I'm personally a big Pride and Prejudice fan, and even though these books are completely different, besides the fact that there is a romance, these books have nothing in common. Six Scorched Roses for some reason reminded me of Pride and Prejudice, and I just had a lot of fun with Six Scorched Roses, and made me even more excited for the next books in this series. So Six Scorched Roses is definitely one of my favorite books from 2025. The next book on my list is also quite different from what I usually read. It's from a very popular author that I read for the first time this year, and now I understand the hype. And it is Billy Summers by Stephen King. This is a thriller where we follow Billy Summers. He's an assassin for hire who is embarking on a journey for his last job as an assassin. And basically everything goes wrong. So in this book we follow Billy as he accepts the job, gets ready for the job, he prepares for the job, and then he does the job, and then things start falling apart. And this is quite a chunky book. It took quite some time for me to finish reading this book because it was just quite dark, and I usually don't like many dark books anymore, especially when they're set in real world. But this book, I just absolutely loved it because Stephen King is just an amazing writer. I love the way he told the story. I love the way he crafts his text. He crafts his sentences, the way he puts words together, his choice of words, his choice of structure for the story, and the way he writes it. In general, I just love this book because I'm a writing nerd, and Stephen King is an amazing writer that deserves the hype. And also this book, it was a really good book, and also it has an amazing duo dynamic. There is in this book just a surprising, I had high expectations for this book, but it was still quite surprising how much I enjoyed it, just because it was quite dark, quite out of my comfort zone. But Stephen King, I just like the way he writes. The next book that I read is also very popular, and it is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. This book has been on my TBR for I think a year, 2 years, and then I started to pick it up at the end of the year, and I absolutely loved it. And in Red Rising we follow Darrow. He's part of the Reds, which is the lower ranking class in the society, and the Reds are basically manipulated to believe something that isn't true. And after a tragedy happens, Darrow decides to join the rebellion, and he infiltrates the Goats, which is the higher ranking class in the society, and the plan is to basically start a revolution from within. And in this book we basically get to know Darrow, we get to know society, the dynamics between the characters, what is life like for the Reds, but also kind of what is not life-like, but what it's like to be becoming an adult if you're part of the Goats. And this book is essentially a sci-fi that reads a lot like a mixture of a dystopia with a fantasy, and I just absolutely love this book. I loved following the characters' journeys, getting to know the characters, and I'm excited to continue reading the series because I want to know what will happen next. And this book definitely deserves the hype. It was just really nice. Again, it gets quite dark, but overall it was a really good book. And yes, Red Rising was one of my favorite books from 2025. And continuing with the sci-fi genre, we have Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, which was one of the highest rated books on my TBR. And there's a reason this book was one of the highest rated books on my TBR. It's because this book is wonderful, and if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend reading this book. Basically, in Project Hail Mary, we follow this scientist who one day he wakes up and he's in a spaceship in the middle of space, but he doesn't remember what he's doing in space, what his mission is. He doesn't even remember what his name is. And we follow this journey as he figures out what is going on, and as he basically tries to accomplish his mission in space. And this book is better if you go into it blindly. You don't need to know anything about this book, just know that this book is amazing. The main character in this book, he was just so funny. It was amazing to be in his head because it was just so funny, and he had very much like a Ken with a functioning brain vibes. And this book, though it is a sci-fi, it is quite an easy sci-fi to understand, and also it makes you feel so many things. And even though this book takes place in the space, this book is essentially about community and friendship and love, platonic love. And this book was so amazing and 100% worth the hype. If you have this book on your TBR, please make it a priority. If you don't have this book on your TBR, please put it on your TBR because this book was just so amazing. It's definitely one of the best books I have ever read, and it's a book I think can talk with people from with many different reading tastes, even if you like sci-fi or if you don't like sci-fi, or it's a book that can easily talk with people no matter their gender, and it's just such an amazing book. And if you haven't read it yet, you need to read Project Hail Mary. And the last and final book on my list of best books that I read in 2025 was also one of the last books that I read in 2025, and it was a book that has been on my TBR for since it was released essentially, and it was Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Maher. In this book, we follow Evie. She is a young woman who one day she finds herself getting a job as the assistant to the local villain, and this is quite a comedic romantasy, and it was just such a funny book to read. I think I read it, most of it, in one sitting, and I just had so much fun reading this book, and that's where I'm going to leave this video. And I'm excited to read the next books in the Season of the Villain series, but that's where I'm going to leave this video. What was your favorite book from 2025? And what book are you most excited to read in 2026? If you like this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, and I hope to see you with another one very soon. Bye!